After making fans wait for almost 15 minutes, the Chargers finally took Omarion Hampton. Was this the right move? Let's go over how the running back fits into the Chargers, what this means for Justin Herbert and Najee Harris, and most important of all, the Greg Roman offense. And even more important of all, please like and subscribe. First, let's talk about Omarion Hampton as a prospect. And I have to be honest with you guys, I think he's very good. And this is a great pick by the Chargers. In my mock draft, I originally had them taking Omarion Hampton, but I changed my mind after the Najee Harris signing, thinking they'd probably go for someone in the middle rounds, and I regret making that change. To me, even as late as the 22nd pick in the first round, you still want to go for the best player available. And looking at the rest of the first round, there's some talent that they could have maybe went for, like a guard like Donovan Jackson would have been nice, or Matthew Golden with his speed, who the Packers took with the very next pick, or maybe even addressed a more dire positional need like a defensive tackle. But in the end, he was the best prospect available, so it made a lot of sense. It's good to see the Chargers are not acting desperate and have a long-term vision. And sure, you could argue a long-term vision would have included maybe a trade down, and it sure seemed like they were highly considering it, considering how they let it get down to the mere seconds of the first-round pick. I think I saw it get down to 20 seconds last time I checked. So I believe Joe Ortiz when he says that they were fielding offers. In the end, if they had taken an offer that was similar to what the Giants gave up, that would have meant that the Chargers would have had to trade down into the second round. Though the Giants' pick in the second round is pretty high, it would have been the second pick of the night, day 2. But still, it's a pretty big fall from the 22nd overall pick to the second pick in the second round. Considering how the rest of the draft shook down, Trevion Henderson likely will be available there, but the Chargers didn't know that at the time and they went for the bird in hand, and I think it just makes a lot of sense, and I think Omarion Hampton also is a better overall prospect than him. For one, Omarion Hampton's RAS score is higher, but still, Trevion's is not bad, by any means. We're talking 43rd since they were tracking versus 106. And Omarion is a better fit, style-wise. He's big, a capable blocker, and is very fast. He isn't the shiftiest guy, but I think it's fine in their offense. Greg Roman will make enough room for him and he'll be able to find those spots. He's also a very capable receiver, though that's not something they're going to utilize that often, but still when it does pop up, it's going to be really useful and they're going to be able to get good chunk gains with him. Of course, you could argue that they can get a defensive tackle there instead, but it probably would have been more of a reach at that point. And I think with Jesse Minter and the job he did last year with, making a good solid core out of spare parts, I think it's safe to say that you can wait a little later and still get good results. You might not be able to say the same thing about Greg Roman in this offensive line, at least yet. More on that in a bit. Overall, I think this pick was an absolute slam dunk, especially when you take into account the depth they now have at running back. Which means we should probably talk about Najee Harris and the rest of the running back room. Obviously, adding a running back when you already have Najee Harris complicates things. What should you expect from Omarion in his first year? I think based on Greg Roman and his history, it's pretty obvious that there's going to be a rotation. I think looking back at Roman's time with the Ravens, you get a pretty clear picture of what it's likely to be. Back in 2020, when the Ravens drafted J.K. Dobbins, they also had a running back room that featured Mark Ingram, a veteran, and a relatively younger player like Gus Edwards. Dobbins wasn't getting featured much at the beginning of the season, and even had some one-carry games. But by the end of the year, he was pretty much the lead guy. Even then, he led the Ravens in rushing, at least running back-wise, but still was 800 yards. Gus Edwards chipped in 700, and Mark Ingram chipped in with 400 in 11 games. So it's safe to say it was basically a committee. However, the big difference is Lamar Jackson also had 1,000 yards on the ground, and that's not going to happen from Herbert. So there's probably going to be more production to be had. So I think it's realistic to think of a scenario where if Omarion Hampton starts off well enough and he shows the coaching staff that he's able to handle all the blitz pickups and whatever, that he gets on the field pretty fast. I wouldn't be surprised if he usurps Najee Harris by the end of the year the way Dobbins did for Ingram. But it's not a given either, considering Mark Ingram was a lot older at that point. So what I'm getting at is I don't think there's going to be a clear-cut fantasy guy. So if you're looking to the Chargers for another running back steal like you did with Dobbins, you're going to have to probably handcuff them and then go with the hot hand. Now let's talk about what this means for the Greg Roman offense, and in a way what this means for Justin Herbert. I think it's fair to say we could have been kind of pleasantly surprised by how well the receiving game worked last year, considering Greg Roman's history with it. It still didn't run that smoothly, and was mostly thanks to just how well Ladd McConkey and Justin Herbert played together, and the fact that Ladd McConkey was able to play relatively injury-free for the year. It was pretty clear that thanks to McConkey's quick twitch and Herbert's arm that they were able to really make what they could have out of the Greg Roman passing offense. So in a way, I don't know if adding a receiver this high would have helped much, but adding a running back does. since it's probably fair to say that whatever you felt about the passing offense on Roman in his first year, you probably felt the complete opposite when it came to the running game. It started off promisingly enough, considering how well Dobbins was playing at the beginning of the year. And even though he ended up getting injured, he still had slowed down by then. And that was thanks to a largely ineffective guard play, which the Chargers have already kind of addressed with Mekhi Becton. And it remains to be seen what they do at center and left guard. Are they going to experiment with Zion Johnson there, where his lack of size won't be as much of an issue? Sounds kind of promising, but we don't know for sure how that's going to work out. I think it's fair to say that it really depends on what the Chargers do going from here to help when it comes to the left guard and center situation, and how that will make this pick look better or worse. So for as much as it really is dependent on that, you can still say that the talent in the room is far better than it was the year prior. Sure, Dobbins was a star coming out of college, but all the injuries did have an effect eventually. And Najee Harris, for whatever you want to say about him, is definitely a step up from Gus Edwards. And obviously, running backs are very dependent on line play, but improving the talent level is not a bad thing. So I think, regardless, the Chargers' running back room is in a way better spot, and thus the Roman offense is in a way better spot since last year. And with room to get even better depending on what the Chargers do for the rest of the draft and during the rest of free agency. Now let's talk about Herbert. And I saw a lot of people getting really upset about this on Twitter. The Chargers yet again didn't get enough help for him, which, I empathize with you guys. I get it. I always want a receiver too. But I think realistically, the Chargers are kind of handicapped by their pick of Roman as an OC. He is what he is, and I think they technically could win with him, but I'm not too hopeful considering how his tenure with the Ravens went, and even with the Niners. I think at some point he's probably going to have to be replaced, but knowing Harbaugh might not come ever. So if that's the case, and like I said, I do think they could still win with him, they might as well build a team around what he does best, which is make everything work around the run game. So making the choice to give him more talented players to work with just makes a lot of sense. And just adding more receivers to the mix wouldn't really make much of a difference. Because like I said earlier, part of the reason why Ladd McConkey worked is because he kind of works outside of that system. Roman isn't exactly great at creating a lot of space for receivers to work with, but McConkey can find that space, and Herbert has the arm to compensate. Not to mention they use a lot of heavy personnel, so they're not exactly putting a lot of receivers on the field at once. Roman did use more 3 and 4 receiver sets than he did earlier in his career, but that was largely because I think his running game was really ineffective last year. And considering the moves that the Chargers are making in free agency and the draft, it doesn't look like that's going to be the case next year. So adding receiver this early probably would have not been the best or smartest idea, considering the reality the Chargers are living in. I think all in all, Herbert is in a better place because of it. Having a good run game doesn't hurt, and an improved O-line also will be better. My only concern is that I hope that Roman figures out a way to get people to stop teeing off on Herbert with play action. The way he was getting hurt last year at the beginning of the season was just awful to watch, so I'm hoping that changes, but we'll see. But overall, thanks to this draft, I'm optimistic about the Chargers season next year, and optimistic about you liking this video and subscribing to the channel. And if you want a draft grades video, make sure to hit that bell because it's coming on Saturday. Thanks again for watching.